So I want to take time today to share with you a bit of my own spiritual journey. Some of you have read a little bit of my bio and you know a little bit of my background, but I want to fill in some of the details along the way because I know that most of you have been on a journey of your own your entire life. So I'm going to ask a series of questions for you to raise your hand just so that I get to know a little bit about you and maybe you can learn some things about each other that you haven't already known. Did anybody here grow up Unitarian Universalist? Or Unitarian or Universalist? Okay, just a few. Good. Excellent. How many of you come from, say, a Catholic background? Oh, that's a lot. Wow. Okay. Yeah. We have to have some type of Catholic recovery group. That's a lot. That's super interesting. What about you grew up in a Jewish background? Several? Okay, that counts. We'll count that. And you can raise your hand more than once if you're super confused about what you did. So that could be a thing for sure. What about a Protestant Christian background? Okay, that's a bunch. Good. Say a Buddhist background of some type. Okay? Let's say pagan of any type. Not yet. Gonna have to watch you, aren't I? How about atheist or non-believer or nothing whatsoever that you can identify? Okay, what have I left out? Who?
Agnostics.
Who? Anybody didn't get a chance to raise your hand or you want to identify? Muslim background of some type? Okay. Good. Okay. Good. So my background, I grew up in Indiana. Any other Hoosiers here?
Close, Cincinnati.
Cincinnati is very close. That's true. I spent a lot of time in Cincinnati. But, so I'm the only Hoosier. We're going to have to change that somehow. So we have some Hoosier snowbirds. That's important. I'll like them a lot. I grew up in a family that was not religious. My mom and dad got married in a church, and that was the only time they were ever in a church together until I got married as an adult. So I didn't grow up going to church, didn't grow up going to Sunday school of any type or any type of religious service. I had a grandmother that attended a United Methodist church, and a couple times a year I might go with her, especially on Easter, and she would take my sister. I have a sister who's a year and a half younger than I am. She would take us out and she would buy us Easter clothes. And my sister would have an Easter dress with a hat, and I'd have some type of stupid suit that I'd have to wear with a tie and a jacket. And then my grandma and my mom got this from her. She would, lick her thumbs and make my hair sit back. I did have hair at one time and do my eyebrows. Anybody do that? You know what I'm talking about? Hate that. But that was really my religious experience as a kid. But I grew up in an area where basically I just dropped my microphone. Details. All right, we'll see if that works. My religious experience as a kid was in an area where everyone just assumed you were Christian, whether you went to church or not. There were in rural Indiana, where I lived, there were no Jews that anybody knew of. I remember the time that the first Mormon family moved in, and you thought that there was some type of a national tragedy happening. They were, a super novelty type of thing. Very, very few minorities. A big Catholic presence, a big German Lutheran presence where I grew up, and a various smattering of other types of Protestant, evangelical, fundamentalist types of churches. In fact, the school that I went to was about 1,200 students, kindergarten through 12th grade. We were all in one building, shared one cafeteria, one gymnasium, and I went to that school my entire childhood. And so that shaped me in many ways that I think are very positive. But at the school, the week after school was out in May, all of the churches in the community went together to do a vacation Bible school. Anybody go to vacation Bible school? You know what I'm talking about? Oh, that's a lot of you. Good. So twice I remember going to vacation Bible school, after my 3rd grade year and after my 5th grade year. And then as a teenager, I had friends that went to church that would invite me to come to youth group activities or various churchy things. And I remember going to one because there was a pizza party and a guy that did magic. That was kind of a thing, but that was my experience as a kid from a religious perspective. Didn't really know anything about God, didn't really care one way or another about religion or church or any of that. I just know that a lot of my friends who went to church had to get up early on Sunday morning and I got to sleep in. So that was kind of my thing. My father's an alcoholic, and my parents were divorced when I was in junior high. We went through several years of him in and out of rehab and my parents having marital problems, but they finally divorced when I was in, right before my 8th grade year started. And my father's side of the family, if any of you know the comedian Jeff Foxworthy and his line about you might be a redneck if, all of that is written about my dad's side of the family. I swear he had like cameras with my dad's family and that's where he would get his jokes. My dad, his brothers and sisters, my grandfather, my cousins were all alcoholics or drug addicts or in and out of jail of some type. But there was something in me from a very young age, and I credit my mom for this to a large degree, that drove me to succeed. I wanted to graduate from college. None of my cousins or aunts and uncles had ever gone to college. I wanted to be the first one to go to college, to graduate from college. So I went to Ball State University, had a journalism scholarship, was super excited about going from a small school to a very large state university. And it was there that I began to get into the college scene, do all the college-y things. In October of my freshman year, I had a really bad experience at a party one night where I drank a little too much and smoked a little too much and did a little too much of this, and I had a blackout. First time in my life that had ever happened. And it really scared me because I heard my dad talk at AA meetings and at churches about blackouts. And I knew that that's not what I wanted for my life. And so I rededicated myself to my studies and to being good. Part of that was that I began to get to know a group of kids in the dorm who were Christians, who went to church, who had Bible study, and they were evangelizing me, if you know what that means. They were praying for me and telling me about Jesus and all of this. And eventually, my freshman year, I decided that in order to keep myself on the straight and narrow, I should become Christian, because that helped me give a moral grounding for what I wanted to do or not do. It told me the don'ts and the do's and how to keep my nose clean. And so I became a Christian as a freshman at Ball State. Not long after that, I went into youth ministry and started working with kids in church and parachurch settings. Went to Bible college, graduated with a Christian education or a religious education degree, and worked in parachurch groups, worked in churches of different types. I spent time in a Wesleyan church, a Reformed church, a non-denominational church, a Church of the Brethren, a this church and a that church. And the whole time trying to learn about what it means to worship God or that God exists and all of that. Went to seminary a few years later and really was wrestling with all the things that I was reading and with what the seminary professors were telling me. Part of the challenge was that my mom raised me as someone who asked questions. And if you grew up in a conservative or fundamentalist or evangelical church or maybe in a Catholic church, you were not raised to ask questions. That's not okay. You just have faith. God's ways are mysterious, right? Does that sound familiar to anybody? Well, I'm not about mysterious in that way. And I remember asking my professors, both at Bible college and at seminary, some questions that they couldn't answer, and then they would chastise me for asking questions. I remember one day having a conversation where I was doubting my faith, and said this out loud to, and there were a couple of professors there, and they literally told me that I was wrong for having any doubts. That my faith wasn't strong enough, I wasn't praying enough if I had any kind of doubts. Well, my mom raised me to ask questions, and that never changed. Eventually, I got to the point where I finished a doctorate. I was teaching at Christian colleges. I was teaching in seminary, mostly youth ministry stuff. But I was also teaching some theology classes and Bible classes. I was teaching a class at a school in Arkansas called the Fundamentals of Evangelical Theology. And I remember at a faculty meeting one day, we were talking about revising that class and getting a new textbook and where we were headed. And the chair of the Bible and Theology department said, I just want to make sure that you all understand the whole purpose of this evangelical theology class is that the students need to know that there's a box of belief you have to have. And if you believe things in that box, then you go to heaven. And if you don't believe what's in that box, then you don't go to heaven. We have to make sure our students believe what's in the box. And I remember thinking at that meeting, how arrogant of us to believe that we know what goes in a theological box. If we believe in a God that created everything that is, if we believe in a God who is infinite and omnipotent, how can we as finite beings believe that we have this God so well defined that we can say what's in and what's out? And it bothered me a lot. Fast forward a couple years to another faculty meeting. We had, of course, a Bible and theology major at this Christian university. And we found out that a lot of those students in that Bible and theology major who had grown up in the church were abandoning their faith. They were saying, I'm no longer a Christian. I no longer believe in God. And we did a little bit of research with them, and part of the reason that they were losing their faith is because we were giving them the easy answers or refusing to answer their questions. If God is a God of love and mercy, then why is there pain and suffering in the world? Well, God's ways are mysterious. If you are an intelligent person, that answer is not okay. That does not satisfy you. And so we found out that many of these students were they were reading books that weren't authorized by the theology department about atheism and about being a skeptic and all of that. So we were talking about how to address this, and we decided that we wanted to offer a new class for seniors called Encountering Atheism, Skepticism, and Doubt. And they asked me to create that class, which was a mistake, as the university soon learned. So I spent a year preparing for this class. And one of the first decisions I made was that I'm not going to use any books written by Christian authors. If we're going to encounter atheism and skepticism, we have to read primary text written by atheists and skeptics, not written by Christians about atheism. That's never made any sense to me. If you're going to read a book about engineering, are you going to read a book written by a biologist about engineers? No, that makes no sense whatsoever. So I wound up adopting some textbooks for this course that made some faculty and supporters of the school really uncomfortable. One of the key texts that I used was called Why I Became an Atheist, written by a former Christian pastor who grew up as a Christian and was a minister for many years before he announced he was atheist and abandoned his faith. The author of this book is a guy by the name of John Loftus, who's written many books since then. I decided to try to get a hold of the author, John Loftus, because we were both from the same area in Indiana, had similar seminary experiences, and I was fascinated by what he had written in this book, How I Became an Atheist. He and I struck up a friendship and still have a good friendship to this day. In fact, I got a message from him this week. I have endorsed some of his books. I've written little blurbs. Last winter, he asked me to write a foreword to his latest book about miracles. He speaks in lots of different atheist and freethinker circles. And I had him come to our class via phone to talk with our students about some things from his book. This became a problem because many of our theology faculty and parents of students and supporters were complaining to the university president that we had this class, that they were reading this book, and they were actually talking to atheists. The students, however, loved it, not surprisingly. Not because I was giving them permission to be atheist or to lose their faith, but because we were talking about the difficult questions that didn't have easy answers. Eventually what happened with that was that as I continued to read, I came across another book that had a huge impact on my life called God's Word in Human Words. The author is Kenton Sparks. He is an evangelical Bible scholar who was teaching at the time at Trinity Seminary, which is near Chicago. And in this book, he talks about how his scholarship has led him to believe that especially the Old Testament, the Hebrew Scripture, is filled with mythology and metaphor and hyperbole, all meant to teach stories. And that especially the historical books of the Old Testament that talk about God ordering the Israelis to murder and to commit genocide and to wipe out entire populations were probably written by leaders to try to convince the people that what they were doing was okay. And that it was never inspired by God, that it was not something that was meant to communicate anything about a loving God. It was written to control people. About 15 years ago, there was a movie that came out that really illustrated this point. Starred Denzel Washington. It was called The Book of Eli. Does that sound familiar to anybody? I don't want to do a spoiler alert, because if you have not seen this movie, I would really encourage you to. But it's about a traveler in a post-apocalyptic America who has a very special treasure that he has to deliver someplace, and he's not really sure where that is. But he's blind, and he's just following some spirit, some energy that he's not really sure how to define. In a city where people, the leaders, find out who he is and that he has this special thing, which turns out to be a Bible. And the leaders want to try to get this Bible from him because they know if they can get the Bible and teach it to the people, that they can have even more mind control over the people out of the fear they have for this God they believe in. The reason that was so impactful to me is because it summarized in a scholarly way a lot of the doubts and thoughts that I had about Scripture. And so my own journey became one of becoming more progressive and more liberal in my thoughts. And eventually, through a series of events, the president of the university decided I could no longer work there. He was kind of cleaning house of people who were causing trouble. I wound up getting fired, lost my job. By the way, in the next book that John Loftus wrote after that, he and I had a conversation that this had happened. He sent me a copy after I had endorsed it, and in the cover he wrote, "Dan, sorry I got you fired. All the best, John." So one of the things we know about our spiritual journeys is that they involve a lot of pain. And the pain for me was realizing that all of the friends that I had at the time really weren't true friends at all. Because once I got fired, once people learned about my own journey, about me becoming more liberal in my thoughts, most of the people I called friends didn't want anything to do with me. They didn't know even how to have a conversation with me. Through another series of events, I got divorced not long after that, and wound up moving back to Indiana from Arkansas. I got a job teaching at a university and leading a graduate humanities and education program at a school called Tiffin University in Ohio, which is between Columbus and Toledo. Met Tess online through an online dating site, and we began to chat and text, and we had a first date in June that was 6 hours long, so that was pretty fun. But as we spent more and more time together, we started to look for a church to attend in the Toledo area. And we wound up at a small Methodist congregation. And part of the reason that we liked this congregation so much is that it was very diverse and very active in social justice issues. And Even though it was less than 100 members, the minister there was a former engineering professor at the University of Toledo, and he learned grant writing. They had 12 people on paid staff at this congregation of less than 100 because of the grants he wrote. So they had a community garden, and they had a paid position for somebody to tend to that garden for the people, and it was a very impoverished area of Toledo. So they could come and plant gardens and have fresh fruit, or other people could come and tend the garden and harvest the fruit and take it around to the apartment complexes and give the families who were in need. They also had another after-school program that was paid for by a grant led by somebody on staff. They had another program that provided medical care for children and their parents through the elementary schools, where they actually paid a doctor to go in and do that care because of a grant. On and on and on. Incredible stuff going there. So fast forward to about 3.5 years ago. I received a job offer to come move to West Palm Beach to be a dean at a Kaiser University campus. Some of you might know Kaiser has about 20 campuses around Florida. So I relocate to West Palm Beach. Tess stays behind in the Toledo area because her youngest son is graduating high school, getting ready to go to college. So I'm going back and forth, she's going back and forth. So I thought, well, we need to find a church down here. So I start visiting churches, and our priorities are a liberal theology, social justice focused, diverse group of people. Should be easy to find, right? I wound up visiting over 20 different churches in the Palm Beach area. And was very frustrated with that experience because I just wasn't finding what we had in Toledo. And as I was Googling progressive churches, I came across the website for the Unitarian Universalist congregation in North Palm Beach. So I took a deep breath and decided to visit one day, praying that God would not strike me dead as I walked in the door with all these heathens and atheists. And what I found was the most lovely, welcoming, socially active group of people I had ever been with in my entire life. Of the 20 churches I visited, this was the only congregation that's followed up with a letter and a phone call asking how I enjoyed being there, asking if I had questions, inviting me to come back. I went to small churches and large churches, Methodist churches and Bible churches and independent churches. But the large church over there is called Christ Community Church. And I visited 2 of their campuses, nobody ever talked to me. Got nothing from anybody, except the person in the parking lot telling me where to park. So Tess and I decided to plant our feet at this UU congregation. And I began very quickly to learn that, as many of you have, I've been UU my whole life and never realized it. Right? There's something about this tradition, because it is open and accepting and non-creedal, that says we value people, we value our environment, we value our planet. We value justice above all. We are all in process. We are all in the search of trying to find our own truth. We are all on a journey. And my journey is not more enlightened than your journey. Your theological truth is not more important than my theological truth. And it is the first time, seriously, in 30-something years of being a person of faith as an adult, where I'm able to sit down and have a conversation about faith and not have anybody say, you're wrong. And not be judgmental. Well, openly. So, over the past 3.5 years, my journey has allowed me to talk to people who are Jewish of all types, who are Catholic, who are Protestant of so many types, Muslim, Buddhist, atheist, agnostic, on and on and on and on and on, and every single person has a story that has something I can learn from. And so where I'm at with my theology today, I call myself a secular humanist Christ follower. I still value my Christian background very much because the teachings of Jesus have a lot there for me. I could spend the rest of my life simply studying the Sermon on the Mount and never become the human I want to be. If I never read any other scripture, simply those 3 chapters from the book of Matthew tell me everything I need to know about how to get along with others, everything I need to know about social justice, everything I need to know about oppression and the work that people who call themselves humans need to do to make the world a better place. But I also have tremendous amount of respect for people who come from all types of theological backgrounds, who disagree with me on pretty much anything, who say Jesus was never a real person, was never a historical person, that the teachings of Jesus actually are detrimental to human rights for various ways. I have tremendous amount of respect for that because we are in an environment as UUs where we can sit down and learn from each other in a non-judgmental way and go, I've never thought about it that way before. Thank you for sharing. So a few months after we started attending that church, the minister there, C.J. McGregor, who's now down at All Souls in Fort Myers, announced he was leaving. And I had an opportunity after he left. People there knew that I had a seminary background. In fact, so does Tess. She's a fantastic speaker as well. She went to a Lutheran seminary. They invited us both to preach on different Sundays. And after the Sunday where I shared, people from the ministry search committee came up to me and said, you should be our minister. And I'm like, what? Really? Me? So we worked out an arrangement where I agreed to work part-time, preach a couple Sundays a month. And my job at Kaiser required anybody who took on a part-time or outside income to let our supervisors know. That's not an unusual thing for an employer to do when you have a contract. So I went to my campus president and told her that I was going to begin this opportunity on November 1st. Told her on Thursday, and on Monday she fired me. No reason given. As you know, Florida's an at-will state, right? No reason given. They didn't want to put anything in writing. I asked her, I asked HR. I went to the corporate office and said I would like to have something in writing, and they refused to say anything. So after 6 months of doing that part-time, they asked me to come on full-time. And very quickly, I decided that this is where I wanted to spend the rest of my career as a union minister, because the social justice work is so important in our culture today. This was not long after the 2016 presidential election that, as we all know, has screwed up our culture, or maybe given evidence of how screwed up our culture is. There's a lot of work to do. And I can speak and work and march and protest and write from this pulpit as a representative of unionism of this congregation and as an individual, more so than I could as a dean at that university. So for the past 2+ years, I've been working through all the requirements to become a Good Housekeeping Seal approved union minister. It's called fellowship. Reading literally hundreds of books, going to seminars, working through internships and all of this. And so I'm still in the process of finishing that. There's hoops and hurdles and all kinds of things to go through. But where I've come to in my life theologically is that I embrace the living tradition that is Unitarian Universalism because it feels so right to me theologically. I am not today where I'm going to be 10 years from now theologically. I'm still in the process of growing. I'm still in the process of learning. As I get a chance to sit down and get to know each of you, I will learn more about your journeys, and you will teach me something about spirituality that I don't yet know. And I look forward to that. I look forward to the challenges that we have together, the challenges that you will present to me because of your own journey, because of who we are. I love the idea of living out our 7 principles and how very complete those principles are when it comes to social justice and the work that we need to do. And the integrity of our own theological and spiritual paths, the work of looking for truth. And we're going to talk more about that in the coming weeks. I am on a never-ending search for truth and meaning. And I believe most of you are here because you are also on a never-ending search for truth and meaning. Whatever that means, wherever that leads. I'm excited to be a part of this together with you. The humility and understanding that we are each on an earnest search for this truth, and that at least theologically, that truth can reasonably look very different for each person and still be truth and still be okay. That is ultimately why I embrace the UU living tradition. And I look forward over the next, hopefully many, many years of learning more with you and living with you and searching for truth with you as we together as a community embrace that UU living tradition more and more and more each and every day.